Yeah, it's this kind of feedback loop where marketing feeds the user, the user feeds marketing. But I also think that now we are quite aware as marketers of the quick tactics to get the click. We also need to give credit to our users because right now I think we're much less prone to respond to these negative headlines or even when something is perceived as scarce, like these scarcity tactics.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search With Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and this week I am joined by the one, the only, Giulia Panozzo. Giulia is joining me to talk all about the neuroscience behind how we search and how it is affected by negativity bias. This is a really interesting subject. I think pulls on a lot of different threads and connects a lot of dots between, like I said, the way we search and search behavior and how that evolves and changes and why certain titles and headlines catch our attention more so than others do, and how our professional lives develop, how our personal lives change, and how negativity bias connects to all of those things and combines and affects all different aspects of our work, our professional lives, and our personal lives as well. It's a really, really interesting conversation. I have followed Giulia and her appearances on podcasts and speaking events and talks and all that kind of stuff for a very, very long time. So it was really, really nice to finally sit down with Giulia and pick all her brains about SEO and neuroscience and how the two combine together for what is now being called neuromarketing. So stay tuned for my conversation with Giulia Panozzo after a word from our sponsors. The first sponsor for this week's episode is Also Asked. You can go to alsoasked.com and check out this fantastic and unique intent research tool. As we probably already know, search intent is at the core of everything we do as SEOs. Even if you're not directly working in content, understanding what your users are trying to achieve through their searches is still pretty important. I think we can all agree. On top of this, Google has told us that it takes up to 9 searches for users to complete their goals. This can be a pretty hard picture to capture, to be honest, with traditional keyword research tools. So what if you could get hold of up-to-the-minute questions that users have asked that have been clustered by intent by Google themselves? Well, that's exactly what Also Asked actually does. Also Asked mines and organizes Google's People Also Asked data in real time, showing you the next most likely question your searchers are going to ask. Best of all, it's completely free. You don't even need to create an account to try out Also Asked. Of course, if you do find it useful, there are paid options as well. We have the free, we have the light, and we have the pro options in terms of accounts that you can subscribe to. At the touch of a button from these accounts, you can download not only the questions people are asking, but also the answers Google has selected, the website URLs, and the titles that are ranking for those answers as well. Also Asked has the world's only API for People Also Asked data, meaning you can combine this data you're pulling from whatever questions you're asking directly into tools. You can combine it with things like ChatGPT to really supercharge your content briefs and transform the way you write content at scale. Go to alsoasked.com and check out this fantastic intent research tool today. Our next sponsor is Core Updates. That is the latest newsletter from the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. You may know Mark from his unsolicited SEO tips and his appearances on this very show. He started this podcast, in fact, and is going to be my co-host every single month on our monthly news recap episodes. But if you just want a bit more Mark, you want all of his unsolicited SEO tips, get them actually solicited directly to your inbox every single week. You get the latest episode of this podcast. You get all of the latest SEO news and articles that Mark has selected and thinks are the things you should be paying attention to. All of that delivered to your inbox every single Monday. So if you want to get, like I said, Mark's usual recaps and stuff, it is one of the best places to go for the latest SEO news and pretty much what you can expect from the best in the industry when it comes to the articles and news that is going on, any updates from Google and all that kind of stuff. Go to coreupdates.com and sign up today to get SEO news, brand new episodes of this very podcast, and Mark's SEO tips delivered straight to your inbox. Coreupdates.com is the place to go. My guest for this week has a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience and has worked in SEO marketing for nearly 10 years. She is the founder of Neuroscience, a neuromarketing consultancy that combining her love and knowledge of both marketing and neuroscience. She has spoken at some of the biggest and best marketing events, which I have seen her speak at, by the way, including Brighton SEO, WTS Fest, HeapCon and SMX London. On top of that, she is also a director of customer acquisition at StockX, a published researcher, a professional figure skater, and has the sparkliest, most sequin-filled outfits in the industry. Welcome to the show, Giulia Panozzo.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack. And also, please have this introduction ready anytime I get on stage everywhere, because this is amazing.
You just want like a little button on the side, just be like, here we go, this is who I am. There you go.
Yeah, like
all of your many accomplishments.
I'll play this forever. So this is my next, preparation ritual. Amazing. Thank you.
I remember chatting to you at Brighton. I think it was last year or so. And, I have a background in science myself. I have an astrophysics degree, and that has not translated in my marketing very much at all. So I was really interested and saw your talk September last year of that, talking about what we're going to talk about on the show, talk about negativity bias and how much that affects the way we search, our work culture, all that kind of stuff. So I absolutely love the way you're combining the science of our brains and talking about how marketing relates to that, because I think it's something a lot of us kind of take for granted in many ways. Like, marketing is so inherent into our brains, and it is built around the way we think and the way we shape things and understand things, and as we're going to get into, the biases that we have as well. A huge credit to you for kind of like combining those two ideas and bringing it together, because I think it's something that the industry is lacking in a lot of ways. We think of marketing in a fairly like airy-fairy, wishy-washy, like, oh yeah, you can do this and maybe that'll work. But the actual science behind how your brain works is so fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, and it's been a bit of a journey, because I think ever since, I moved to the UK, and then my story is a bit one of failure, I guess, and then like going with the path of least resistance. So I couldn't secure a PhD in time to stay in the country. So I started working first in a bar, and then like found a job in marketing. And whenever I told people what I did and what I studied, everyone without fail was like, oh, you ended up so far from what you studied, so now you don't use it anymore, right? And to me, like, as you mentioned, it's something that is ingrained in marketing, like the need to understand, the need for understanding customers and understanding how their brain works. But that's not super obvious for anybody else. I think now we got a bit more exposure to that. But yeah, at the time it was absolutely like two words apart, and everyone was like, oh yeah, I mean, that's your degree down the drain. So yeah, thank you for for the hype, because it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, and I know it's fascinating. Like you said, having your career as a researcher and getting your degree, then the figure skating side of things as well. You have so many different like paths in your career and so many different points in your career. And I love the fact that you're kind of bringing them all together in many ways. And then, like I said, bringing that scientific side to marketing. I think a lot of us think of like, oh, we have personas for customers, all that kind of stuff. When you think of it in a very people-driven kind of way rather than a brain chemistry, brain science kind of way. And again, like I said, my background in science, I'm a very logical, scientific kind of person. My sister has a PhD in neuroscience and is I think she's the head of research communications at Diabetes UK, so is working with a lot of the neuroscience stuff there. So it's always been like bubbling away in the background and always having conversations with my sister about this. And I love, like I said, that you're bringing the two together, and I'm fascinated by the topic we're going to talk about, because it's something we've touched on a little bit. I touched on confirmation bias with Sarah Presh a few months ago, and kind of spinning on its head and thinking about how negativity bias affects the way we search, the way we interact with people online, how we progress in our professional lives and our professional careers. Like, I think, again, it would seem like such a small, like you said, disconnected seemingly topic, but actually it all ties together perfectly, and you can talk about it from so many different angles. Because I would think like, oh yeah, that makes sense in the way we search kind of way, but also the career side of things was something I would never have thought about until I was reading and saw your speech and talk at last year's Brighton SEO. I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Of course, that's part of our brains and how that works as well.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when you don't take into account, how the brain functions, you just tend to assume this is a personality trait, and whenever you focus on the negative, it's because you're a particularly negative person, and that's not the case. I think acknowledging that this is a tendency that we have ingrained basically since very early infancy is also what allows us to work on it and to improve not only our reaction to certain events that might happen in our life, also our professional career, our mindset, and our personal lives too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the fact that the negative side of things, like you said, I think a lot of people see it as a personality thing of like, oh, I always focus on the negative. I'm such a pessimist, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I would consider myself, I'm very cynical, very skeptical, all that kind of stuff, and I always focus on the negative rather than the positive. But as you're saying, that's ingrained in our brains as humans, right? Do you want to kind of like dive into a little bit of the neuroscience behind that as well?
Yeah, so just like to introduce what the negativity bias is for like people
Yeah.
who might not have heard about it before. It's this over attention to the negative side of things. So, for example, we're more prone to allocate emotional value to something that's negative as compared to neutral or positive. So this is like the core definition. And when we look at the neuroscience behind it, there's a few studies that have highlighted from different perspectives how this is basically something that's, as you mentioned, ingrained in our brain. So there's been functional magnetic resonance studies, which are, like those pretty brain schemes that you see on certain scientific reviews. That's a product of fMRI. So they have highlighted how there is this area called pregenual anterior cingulate cortex that has more of an activation when it comes to negative stimuli versus positive or neutral ones. And this is an area that normally is involved in emotional processing, but also in interoception. And also, this is like the same area that has, a stronger activation when stimuli are attended internally, so when they come from ourselves rather than externally. And that might be the reason why negative self-talk, for example, is a bit harder to overcome. So when you say, oh, I'm so bad at this, and then people are like, no, you're actually good at this, and you don't believe it. That's got science behind it to back it up. And then there's other studies, and these are more related to highlighted the brain patterns in relation to certain stimuli. Today, like, I cannot pronounce that word right, but like, I hope the listeners will be patient with me. So there's ERP studies as well, which are event-related potentials. These are studies that highlight certain brain patterns in response to certain events, so certain stimuli. And these have highlighted how there's a larger amplitude called late positive potential for negative stimuli that as compared to neutral or positive. So like from different angles, this has been highlighted, this sort of functional asymmetry for negative stimuli has been highlighted already by a number of studies and across several areas. And the reason why we seem to have this over attention already from an early infancy is, so they've tried to explain it from different angles, and I think it's still an area that's under research. So there's nothing that's for sure, but it looks like it developed as an adaptive trait for the survival of the species, because by becoming more responsive to negative stimuli or threats, then we're more prone to have an adaptive response. So there's like this evolutionary theory behind it. However, I think it's important also to understand how, like, while we have this tendency, we're also equipped with a brain that's extremely plastic, so extremely adaptive. And we can work on this to, make sure that we can overcome this negativity. And I got like an anecdote here, and I think people should run some studies on it. But in my past as an artist, like with all the figure skating and etc., I was also in an acting school, which in itself would be like another podcast because of
Speaking of rejection and negativity, acting is full of it.
But so one of the core or the core modules, I guess, of this course was to do emotional preparation. And like, to be honest, in any sort of class, you were always prompt to experience scenarios in your head. So like, you needed to start imagining things happening. And because of the way that this school or like this course is structured, a lot of the things were negative. Like, you had to work on urgency, and like something was a matter of life or death, and you had to basically put yourself in that position all the time, twice or three times a week. And so I started developing, like, I got attuned to these negative emotions more easily, but to the point that I like got anxiety attacks, because, it's, you get like your brain to strengthen these associations and to think that, if somebody knocks on the door, it's somebody there to tell you that somebody has died. Like, it's a bit of a convoluted, sentence, these ones that I've just made. But that really made me think about, like the neuroplasticity and how we're so reactive to anything that happens around us. So whether we're equipped with these biases when we are born or not, like, it's always something that we are able to work on. And that's like the core of this conversation. I want to empower people to think, these might be happening because you got this negativity in you, but it's something that you can reverse, at least to an extent.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, where I feel like, and I'm sure we'll get into this, and how much of marketing affects our brains and the way marketing is based and meant to affect us. Like, the core of marketing is drawing out those emotions, right? Even if going way back before it was digital marketing, before we were ever on the internet or doing SEO or anything like that, you want to get an emotional response from the person you're marketing to. And like you said, because of that negativity, because of those instant connections that we make, you can easily get a response from outrageous headlines. I know you gave an example in your talk from Lily Ray, talking about how the Twitter outrage suddenly blows up, and as soon as you open a Twitter like thread or feed or whatever, it's just constant people arguing and explosions and all kinds of stuff, and like everybody's constantly arguing and it's constantly negative. And that's the stuff that is always filtered to the top, whether that's social media posts, whether that's headlines and those kind of like clickbaity things you see on YouTube and things like that. Do you think that's a reaction and part of what we do as humans, that marketing towards the negative thing? Or is it kind of a combination of both, where the brain affects the marketing and then marketing affects the brain, and we're kind of now trained ourselves to react to that stuff, especially online?
Yeah, I think it's this kind of feedback loop where, as you mentioned, marketing feeds the user, the user feeds marketing. But I also think that, like, now we're quite aware as marketers of the tactics, like the quick tactics to get the click, but we also need to give credit to our users, because right now I think we're much less prone to respond to, or like we might be prone to respond to like these negative headlines, or even when something's like perceived as scarce, like these scarcity tactics. But it's because we've developed an exposure to it. So we're kind of trained not to click on that. Especially, for example, okay, we've talked about the outrageous headlines, but there's also like the stuff when you look for when's season 5 of Emily in Paris coming up. People are like, this is a very extreme example, and don't watch it, unless you're in for like some, for wasting your time. But it's great to have in the background anyway. And sometimes you have these headlines that trick you into clicking, and then you realize that they're all like that, or like this particular outlet always puts the release dates there in there, or like here's what we know, including release dates, and then it's not what they provide. So I think, you start recognizing those patterns. And I think users are getting more and more attuned to recognize these patterns. However, we do seem to have this tendency to click on the negative. There's a couple of studies actually that I've come across, and one is massive. I think they studied 105,000 headlines. So they were divided in positive and negative. And this is a study, actually, I'm going to cite it because it's I think everyone should read it. And it's called Negativity Drives Online News Consumption, which in itself, it's already everything you need to know about the study. And it's by Claire Robertson. And they found that there's a significant, higher CTR for negative headlines. And this is even when positive words are actually prevalent in the data set. So the effect was massive. And it's just something that as humans, we tend to respond to. Then they didn't really, I don't think they expanded on why this happens. Because especially when you're looking at studies of this scale, it's really hard to focus it's really hard to isolate all variables. But I think it's a great indicator of how we tend to react as users to certain things that are fed to us. So not only news consumption, but even when we look, for example, at, what we engage with on social media. So Lily already did the example with Twitter, but then, on TikTok, when there's this trend of putting, this is why you shouldn't hire a photographer for your wedding. And then obviously you look at the video because you want to understand what's the negative side of it, and you want to sort of prepare yourself. And then it's all positive aspects of it. So they trick you into it. But I think the more we get exposed to it, the more we start, the more we are attuned to discerning when this is happening and when this is a trick. We're not in the 90s anymore. These sales techniques, I think, are a bit surpassed, and it would still work on somebody that's not as exposed to marketing as we are, I guess. But I think we need to give a bit more credit to our users as well.
Yeah, I think that's totally relevant to the shift we've been seeing so much in people understanding the internet and understanding digital marketing, even if, like you said, they don't come in with the marketing brain that we have working professionally in marketing. Because I'm hugely skeptical, hugely cynical. Basically, all of the time, I will be questioning and unsure of any headline. I don't trust anything until I can see sources, references, citations, something you can confirm and prove to me you know what you're talking about. And I think that's so true for... We're seeing this shift with the younger generations, Generation Z and Generation Alpha as well, and how they use the internet. And they are far more questioning and unsure and uncertain on all that kind of stuff. And I know I talked about this way back when we were talking about TikTok as a search engine. You mentioned TikTok focusing on the negative side of things, and the way a lot of people would initially search on TikTok and then move over to Google to kind of verify or confirm. You get the initial bit of information from TikTok, but they don't tend to cite sources or reference papers and like you were just doing there. There's that element of okay, yeah, cool, but do I believe you and do I trust you? And like I said, I hope that we're moving in the right direction, where we're moving away from the clickbaity headlines, the YouTube thumbnails with the shocked face and the emojis and stuff and all that kind of thing. As someone who is now publishing on YouTube, I am constantly battling with how clickbaity do I make this thumbnail? I did an experiment a few episodes ago where I did a face like this and a face like that and doing different poses and trying different things. And I find that stuff fascinating where, like you said, we've kind of give the credit to the user, where people I think are starting to get sick of this stuff. I know I am, and maybe that's me being old and in my 30s and having experienced, like you said, all of the early internet stuff when it was really, really bad. And hopefully the younger generations are heading in a similar direction. So we will see a filter through of, I think, what is more authentic, more real, more genuine content. And I guess that is kind of the tagline from Google, right? Provide helpful content and stuff. It's like, yeah, sure, but I see a lot of this negative clickbaity crap also ranking. So which message is it, Google? How do you balance that out?
Yeah. And to be honest, like a lot of us will fall for the clickbait, but then we realize very quickly that that's not what we're looking for. And then that's where negativity bias comes into play again, because like if you're having a bad first impression from a website or a service or something, it's much more difficult to go back to a baseline and to revert that feeling. So that's like, you can use those tactics, but then when the user understands that it's not what you're providing, that's not helpful, then they disengage. As you mentioned, Google is sort of rewarding these tactics, and hopefully we'll see a shift. But I think the new generation, as you mentioned, is already starting to get more discerning. There was, I don't remember what study that was, and it was a marketing study, but it showed how, for example, the new generation is much more wary of reviews. Everything that has 5-star reviews, they tend to be a bit more wary about, because they're like, oh, surely it's fake. So something that's a bit more authentic, something that's like, that's got a sprinkle of a 1-star review because it's more realistic, is something actually that's more attuned to what they're looking for.
I love that example of reviews. It's a conversation I have with my wife every time we go and trying to buy something on, especially on something like Amazon or a big e-commerce platform that has built-in reviews in the system. I will look for this thing and I'll say like, yeah, this looks good. It seems like a good price. The first question my wife asks is, what are the reviews like? Yeah. And my answer is always, I don't care. Those people are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. Because it's all, and so often you will see the kind of like paid for, hasn't arrived yet, but it's probably great, 5 stars. I'm like, you haven't even used the thing. Like, this is a real example. I was buying a like electric stapler to fix our fence and sort out some things, and basically trying to cat proof our garden. And we were searching for different types of the options for should it be wired, should it be powered, should it be gas powered, all this kind of stuff. And I had done all the research, again, thinking from like the strength and the power and the technical specs and all that kind of stuff. And my wife was like, what are the reviews like? I'm like, okay, fine, let's have a look. And like you said, as soon as you get a bunch of 5 stars, I'm like, hold on a minute, I don't trust them. And the same with the 1-star thing. I think there's almost a swing back. And this, excuse me, this comes back round to my experience with a lot of like my pop culture journalism stuff, when it was like video games and films and all that kind of stuff. You get review bombers as well from the negative side of things. You get people freaking out about women being in movies or women being in video games. So I'm going to review bomb that thing. And now it's got 1 star on Metacritic or whatever. And I'm always fascinated by, what's a 3-star review for this product like? Who goes and puts a 3 or a 4-star? That's the nuance. That's the interesting bit for me. Maybe I'm saying more about how my brain works here. You're probably understanding this more than I am, Giulia. But like, that was where I come in as like, I'm skeptical of 1 and 5, but maybe somewhere in the middle there might be some actual genuine content. And I know Google is trying to fight a lot of the fake review stuff. They're now putting notices on Google business profiles of, we have recently removed fake reviews on these profiles and things like that. So there is definitely a shift towards, like you said, trying to combat that stuff. And like you said, I think a lot of users are now more skeptical, more wary, more discerning of this kind of stuff. So hopefully, again, speaking of the users feeding back to the system, hopefully then that pushes towards more authentic content, more real reviews, more actual useful stuff that, like we said, Google claims to be doing with EEAT and all those kind of like foundational principles that they talk about. But we still see so much clickbaity headlines, negative stuff, outrageous things drawing all of these clicks. And I wonder, is that going to be a shift? Does that work in cycles, right? Are we going to then come back around in another 10, 20, 30 years and we'll swing back around to being negative again, and then we'll be a bit more positive and a bit more discerning?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a moving target. We work in an industry that's extremely shifty. So we're like always trying to figure out what the next trend is. But these one of the reviews, actually, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because we're also more prone, like this negativity bias tendency makes us more prone to leave negative reviews rather than positive. If you think about it, I think it was a study by Zendesk, and it was like 20, you're more likely to leave a review. I'm gonna find the reference because I've got it.
So, viewers and listeners, I will include all the links we talk about. I will, if Giulia and I will find all the links for the studies and stuff. So, if you do want to dig into the data, click the links in the show notes, and I will add them all for you for future reference.
Yeah. So yeah, this study from Zendesk from last year. They highlighted how in the post-purchase stage, so like obviously when you buy a product, you're more likely to leave a negative review even when unprompted, as compared to something to a positive one that's incentivized. And I think it was like the split was 46% more likely to leave a negative review. And if you think about it, like in your daily life, how many times do you go to a nice restaurant and you're like, oh, I need to review it because you want to give them some help, and then you forget about it, you deprioritize it. But if you had a bad experience, you're gonna be there like straight away, and that's on the another display of negativity bias.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. Like you said, thinking of, I think that's so common. Again, why I'm so skeptical of so many reviews, and when you're thinking about, oh yeah, I had a really nice time. The food was good, the service was good. It didn't blow me away, it wasn't amazing. I'm not like hugely incentivized to be like, I need to go and give them a 5-star review, put some photos on their Google business profile or whatever it is. But if you have a bad experience, you then have a like, yeah, I'm going to make them pay. I'm going to give them a 1-star review. I'm going to negatively affect their rankings, all this kind of stuff. And like you said, you're kind of fueled by that negativity in that way, right? You're then almost given the incentive to get revenge in a way, almost with a bad review.
Yeah, sometimes disproportionately so. I think obviously we live in a culture where the face-to-face is a bit discarded as compared to what we like, the online interactions that we have. And I feel like there's the ability to leave reviews online without telling to the cook, oh, my chicken was undercooked, it makes us feel safer. And that brings me to another rabbit hole, actually, that in itself would be a different podcast. But
I feel like we need to do like 3 follow-up podcasts. Yeah, exactly. We've got so many rabbit holes to go down.
Yeah, but I think human interaction actually is a modulator for these negative attitudes, because there was another study that I'm actually bringing to another talk that showed how when we are interacting with a chatbot, we're much more likely to have a positive attitude towards it if they got anthropomorphic features as compared to just like robotic ones, which I think, this study was done to show something else. But if we bring it into this conversation, it's actually really relevant to show how, when you put the human behind your marketing, then you might as well have a better attitude from the user, because the connection is something that we value as humans. That's another rabbit hole that I encourage people to go down.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is the element when it's coming around to thinking about the way we interact online. Like you said, having the ability to be essentially faceless and nameless also allows you to get away with being more openly negative, which I think a lot of people give the bad name of like a Karen who is going to stand out and cause trouble in a restaurant or whatever. And being married to a Karen, I know all about that. My wife is not afraid to say if she is receiving a bad service. She is the opposite of me, and I am very, like, as we were saying before we started recording, you always have to have a balance in a marriage, right? Like, in a relationship, like, my wife is the one that will stand up and fight for what's right and, question injustice there and then to the person's face, and I'll be like, I'll probably leave them a quiet negative review later on. I'll take it. Like you said, I'll eat my undercooked food or just leave it on the plate and not say anything. Whereas my wife would be like, what the hell is this? How come you've done this? And like be ready to go and confront. And I think, especially coming to sort of the British sensibility, which I think I embody more so, is this very quiet kind of stiff upper lip style, like, oh yeah, we'll just get on with it and then we'll complain about it quietly later. But the ability to do it online, namelessly and facelessly, gives you that freedom to just kind of say and do whatever you like, right? You can then be as negative as you want and have the ability to kind of get away with it, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. But again, I think we're going to see a shift, hopefully. because I think right now the industry is moving, or at least, the guidelines are moving towards a more authentic space, a more, again, like helpful content, and something that feels more attuned to the human nature rather than like pleasing the search engine. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Fingers crossed for the future. We're trying to bring a hopeful message in here as well as to balance out and
Yes.
counteract the negativity. And I think something Sarah and I talked about, like I said, on that the confirmation bias side of things. So the way you would kind of almost counteract the negativity and try and reinforce your own beliefs and use confirmation bias as a way to only accept what already confirms your established thoughts and beliefs and that kind of thing. I think we have the polar opposite side of things where we're also inclined to search in a negative way as well. And I've used a couple of examples. I know I was talking with Mark about this a little while ago as well, where just putting like good or bad or the best or the worst in front of the exact same search term can fundamentally change the SERP, completely shift what seemingly is factual information. And the example I know a lot of people give is like, is Donald Trump a good American president? Yeah. Is Donald Trump a bad American president? And you will get completely different answers that seemingly are factual, like, yes, he is good because of this reason, or no, he is bad because of this reason. But that is hugely affected by the way you search. So do you think there is a lot of that negativity bias when it comes to the actual queries we put into search engines as well?
I think it depends on the domain that you're searching. Like sometimes you just want an honest review of a product. Sometimes you want to know who to vote for. And obviously the stakes are different. So I do think that, confirmation bias and negativity bias sometimes are intertwined, and sometimes one might take over another. I think when you're at a stage where you are invested already in what you believe is true, you're most likely to look for what confirms your hypothesis. So if you're, like you already want to vote for Trump, you're more likely to go after the positive reviews. Whereas I think when you're at the stage where only your time and attention are at stake and like you're trying to actively get more informed, I think there is an element of negativity bias in the way we search, because we want to be warned about the threats, right? But I usually believe it's a matter of where you are in the journey.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Like you said earlier on, when you talk about the almost like the evolutionary nature of it and us seeking out threats and things like that, I think it's really interesting to kind of actively question your own beliefs. Again, coming around to me being very skeptical of basically everything, of like, okay, I've seen this thing or I understand this thing from this article or video or piece of content or whatever it is. What is the other side of that? How can I question that? And purposefully searching for a challenging perspective. And like you said, I think getting honest reviews and honest opinions is so difficult these days with how polarized everything is. Like using the examples of the reviews and everything's 5 or 1 star and hardly anything in between, or the political side of things, like saying a much higher stake of everything is extreme right or extreme left. I love this person, I hate this person, all that kind of stuff. How do we go about kind of challenging our own negativity bias and understanding that no matter what we're searching, we need to be aware of how that negative information is going to affect us and how that kind of marketing is going to be directed towards us?
Yeah, really training ourselves to be discerning. I think questioning, as you mentioned, as you question everything that you search and everything you come across with, like understanding that, we're not faced with an infallible search engine, whatever engine we look for. Always question, always use critical thinking. I think one of the best courses I did in uni, it was developmental social neuroscience. And everything I learned from that, I don't remember really. But what I remember is that it taught me to apply critical thinking to everything, even to scientific papers, because at the end of the day, we all come with our biases, even in our research. So this professor was from Minnesota. Whereas everyone else was Italian. Yeah, I studied in Italy. So I think in Italy, you have this tendency to go with what you're taught in school. And I think maybe in the UK, it's different. I think it's way more, way less dogmatic from what I've seen. And this American professor came to our course and was like, okay, now instead of like having these frontal lessons where I teach you everything, you're going to take a study. Half of the class is going to bring the thesis as to what the study wants to present. And the other half is going to criticize the study or like find weaknesses. And that was hugely important for me and for my development later on, because that was something I was not exposed to. And I think this is something that as users and as somebody that consumes and who consumes news on the internet, we need to make this a necessary step in the way we approach searches. You mentioned we just talked the political side of searches. The study that I mentioned earlier, the one by Claire Robertson, actually showed how the negativity is more prone to be showed for economic and political news, and how this kind of fits the division and polarization. So again, something that's hugely important to take care about. Sometimes it's difficult because you wake up, you scroll the news, and you're not like really even awake yet. And for sure, you don't want to be there and apply critical thinking to everything. But I think it's something that we need to be training in, because again, like we have the possibility of changing our behaviors, our mindset, the way we think, and what we believe really. So we got a massive power in our hands.
Yeah, don't underestimate your own power, listeners and viewers. That I think that's hugely relevant. And I think, like I said, there was something that really stood out to me when I saw your talk last year, was that element of thinking about this from the career and professional side of things, which is something I had never really thought about, and I'd kind of encountered a bit of the negativity bias as we're talking about from the more of the marketing perspective. But how can that negativity bias affect your workplace, your career progression, and things like that?
Yeah, so in a number of ways. So in the attempt of like answering this question that I had myself last year, I ran this study, and it was a questionnaire, especially for marketers, around feelings in the workplace. So there was a test within the test that I'm going to explain in a second. But what I was investigating was like, how do you feel at work in these scenarios? And it wasn't open questions. It was basically on a scale of from disagree to agree or strongly agree. So there were different statements, and these were either negative statements or positive statements. And the presentation of it was randomized. So I don't know why I feel like I need to tell you about the study design, but basically because I knew about the negative priming. So whenever you consume something negative, then you're more primed to, consume or like think about something negative. I didn't want to have this negative priming in the way that I was presenting the questions. So they were randomized within themselves, but they were divided in two parts. So one was the positive, one was the negative. And within the randomization, there was also this element of sometimes the positive would be in front, sometimes the negative would be in front. So I also wanted to investigate the negativity bias within the questionnaire to see if people that were presented the negative statements first were actually showing more negativity. But the main messages that came out of that were hugely surprising to me, because to be honest, I came to the study wanting to basically prove that, negativity bias is more likely to be found in junior people. So we need to foster them to, change mindset. I actually found like completely different things. So the way that the negativity bias impacts our career is because we tend to assume something negative even when there's ambiguity. So, for example, career ambiguity, when we're not too sure about where we're going with our career, it's, defined that, or like it's perceived as a negative path. So if I'm not too clear about my professional development, then I'm more likely to think, oh, my career is going downhill. I'm never going to do anything good in my career. I'm not good at my job, etc. This was true also for people that self-reportedly are somebody that are aware, that like take on feedback as something to take on, as something positive to take on. They're also somebody who takes on challenges, and like instead of like seeing hurdles as negative things, they take them on as challenges. So these were all people that knew they were good at their job, because again, like this was another part of the questionnaire. They knew they were good at their jobs, that they contributed to the industry and to their business. But again, when ambiguity was a factor, they were more prone to think the negative of it. And the thing is that when we think about our like the negative side of our career, it puts us in a loop of like learned helplessness, which is this concept that has been explained in several studies. To be honest, like older studies, they've shown in animal studies as well. I usually recommend the books and the studies by Martin Seligman, who's considered the father of positive psychology. And what they notice is that when we feel like we don't have control over something, when we feel like something is ambiguous and we don't really have an understanding of what's going on, we stop trying. They showed this in animal studies as well. And when, a reward was given or like was consistently not given versus when it was intermittently given, then it had different effects on the attitude on the animals towards the next interactions. So again, like if we feel like we don't have control over what's happening, if we feel like there's an ambiguous aspect to our career, then we're more likely to end in this loop of learned helplessness. And when we're looking at a negative pattern, a negative organization, it's not positive. Well, obviously it's not positive, but it's not constructive, not only from a personal perspective, but from a business perspective as well, because of emotional resonance. So, if you have a disgruntled employee and they talk to other people, they're going to sort of bring them into this negative outlook. But it's also because it's been shown how a negative feeling can cause decision paralysis, can cause a decline in production. So obviously this is not only an interest that employees should have, obviously as humans, but if we're only looking at the money side of it, businesses, listen up. You need to invest in your employees in like working on their mindset and providing feedback, changing your language, providing mentorship opportunities so they can actually see a way out of this negative loop. So yeah, I think that was a very convoluted answer to how it affects our professional lives. But there were a number of things that came out of that study and that were hugely surprising for me, because they weren't necessarily like even attached to the lack of seniority or to the lack of experience, because CEOs or C-level participants had the most negative scores. So they're the ones that maybe because they're faced with more pressure, maybe because they don't have actually somebody, like they're the ones that are providing the guidance and
the feedback and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, and since you mentioned feedback, sorry, I'm just going on a huge rabbit hole again.
That's why you're here, mate. That's why. It's exactly why you're on the podcast.
Yeah, because we talk about this lack of control and like how it affects the way that we perceive that we want to proceed in our next actions. This is something that businesses should take into account, providing a two-way feedback. So I think now it's more common, luckily, because we got a healthier work culture than we used to have. And it's usually culture dependent, I think. But having this feedback that's not only top down, so you don't only have, your C-levels that give you feedback or your manager giving you feedback, but something that I found in my previous job and in my last job as well is, having my line manager asking me, what can I do better for you? And it might be just a sentence that changes, how the employee feels about the job that they're doing, the contribution that they're making, because it provides this aspect of a control and essentially, like provides some hope in the way that they experience the workplace and the way that maybe like the industry is going. Sometimes we feel like, even I feel in SEO, you got all of these stuff going out, like 1,000 new algorithms a day, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? Like, I have no control over this, and I know that I felt that way. So the same sort of feelings applied to the workplace can be hugely detrimental, and I think, though, is something that businesses do have not only the possibility to work on, but the responsibility to work on.
Yeah, definitely. I think like you said, the two-way street for feedback stuff is so important. And I agree with you. I think we're moving in a positive direction when it comes to work culture and that kind of thing in general. I think there are still plenty of terrible agencies to work at, terrible places to work in-house. I've heard plenty of horror stories over the years from people. But I think you're totally right. There's that element of having that two-way feedback where you can feed back to your manager, and even people on the same level as you, having that kind of like peer-to-peer discussions as well. We have a really nice little HR system here at Candour, as an example, not trying to, kiss ass or anything like that, but you can leave comments and feedback for anyone in the company. So you can say like, oh, this person who is not directly my manager, who is not underneath me at all, they helped me out with this thing, and you could just send them a little note that says, hey, this is a positive thing. And when it comes to things like annual reviews or professional reviews or, professional development review or whatever it is, the line manager of that person can then see like the other notes from other people being like, yeah, this was great. Oh, thank you for helping out this thing and all that kind of stuff. And I think having a open, communicative, the ability for anyone to feedback on any kind of task, I think is hugely positive. Like you said, rather than that top-down, the one person or the two or three people, the directors or whatever it is, the CEOs, are always focused on, as you said, the weight of their negativity, them being bear down on everyone else, and then everyone else having to receive that negative feedback or positive feedback, granted, but always having to receive that feedback. And there was something really interesting in your talk that really stuck out to me that is a classic saying, a typical kind of thing that we say of no news is good news, right? And coming back around, you were saying about that feedback, about that ambiguity, about the communication style from whether that's managers or C-suite people or whatever it is. You assume that no news is good news, but actually leaving that door open because we have that bias towards negative feedback. And if it was something nice, they probably would have already said it, right? So if they haven't said, hey, can we have a meeting next week, or can we have a quick chat from your boss, is like the most terrifying sentence in the world, right? Yeah. Even though you visibly reacted to it, and we both just went like, oh no, horrible. Like just that little thing. It could be like, brilliant, yeah, you're doing well, would you like a raise? Or, hey, I noticed you haven't used your training budget. Or, hey, you haven't booked your travel for this thing. Or could be something as simple as, what do you fancy for lunch? Could be something as small as that. But instantly, can we have a chat, especially from someone senior to you, is just instantly negative, right? And I love the way you kind of dived into that data of what seems like a very neutral statement actually leads, because of that ambiguity, leads to a negative response from people almost automatically.
Yeah, exactly. It happened to me 2 weeks ago, and like I am well versed into this.
You've literally studied this stuff.
Yeah, and I go, do you have 5 minutes to talk? And I'm like, oh my god, what have I done? Did I not, like, every kind of scenario went through my mind, and you start thinking about what you did in 1998, and it wasn't like, it was something completely different. But it's hugely important to provide context. It takes no time, and I think it's something that, because we're extremely busy as individuals, where we tend to be like, oh yeah, can you be in a hangout? Just like take the habit of providing that context, because it's hugely important, and can save quite a lot of employees from having their minds just skewed towards the negative.
Yeah, I think that can really ruin your day as well, right? If you have that thing of like, oh, can we have a chat tomorrow? The rest of that
Oof.
day is just like
Gone.
you're gone, basically. Yeah, completely written off. And I know this is something very common with my fellow neurodivergent people as well. Like, since I was diagnosed with ADHD last year, understanding the rejection sensitivity dysphoria side of things as well, and again how my brain processes negative information. As I said, I'm very cynical, I'm very skeptical. I leap towards the negative stuff straight away, especially when it comes to myself. You were talking right at the top of the show, Julia, about that internal side of things, the
Yep.
self-talk of negativity having so much power on us, and things like that. And even, not being able to recognize your own achievements and stuff like that. I know I've talked to plenty of people where they have like an achievements folder or a hooray folder or something like that. Screenshot any nice feedback you get, any positive comments. Like, for example, me doing the podcast, you'd be like, oh, hey, I really enjoyed that episode you did with Julia. It was really interesting. Like, screenshot that, save it in a little folder somewhere, or take a photo of it on your phone, whatever it is. And I found that, and I know a few other people find that really helpful as well. I know our friend Miriam Zessier talks about this a lot. They have, I think they call it a yay folder or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the element of like, okay, if they're feeling down, if I'm feeling down, whatever it is, if I'm worried about that negativity coming in and thinking like, okay, the boss is about to speak to me, what's it going to be about? Have a little thing to refer to. Have a little bit of that positivity to balance it out, so you don't then swing massively into the negative side of things. Do you do something like that as well, Julia? I don't know if you're a practicer of the achievements folder, the yay folder, the whatever.
I used to, and now, so you know what? I'm usually disorganized, so I have. So it's probably somewhere, but I stopped collecting, and it's something that, to be honest, like I always tell other people, like, have a yay folder or have a, just like an achievement, celebrate your achievement sort of thing. And I don't anymore, but I used to. But whether you find that it's better for you to share your victories with somebody else, or with yourself in a folder, just take the time to celebrate those victories, because I know that you still remember what you did and something bad that you did in kindergarten, but there's also so many things that you've done otherwise. So yeah, I should actually take that on again, because I always preach about it. And then whenever it gets to my folders, I literally have a folder that's like stuff that should be sorted, because it all goes to the desktop. But yeah, and also something that you've mentioned on how something negative can impact your day, or like something ambiguous can impact your day. There was this other study that was done, and I think, and I'm going to provide the details for the show notes. But they showed how consuming, I think it was up to 3 minutes of negative news in the morning, can affect like your whole day. And I think you're more likely, like significantly more likely, to report your day as bad once you've like had this negative priming with negative news. So definitely something that if you want to celebrate something, do it first thing in the morning, because it's going to hopefully counteract this tendency to ruin our days, really.
Yeah, I think that ties exactly around to you saying, like, the first impression of brands sort of thing is exactly the same, right? Getting off on the wrong foot, whether it's your day, whether it's your first experience with a particular product or a brand or whatever it is, the first impression is so important and can make such an impact. And like you said, I know a lot of people, Tasman Suleiman talks a lot about mindfulness and practicing like gratitude in the morning and things like that. Like, again, maybe this is me being very cynical and very skeptical. I don't do much of that stuff. I again focus more on the negative side of things to my detriment. But I think that is a hugely important thing to, like you said, balance your day out and start it off on the right foot. And even having, like, I know a lot of people have little rituals of like, oh, I need to have my coffee or I need to have my breakfast first before I do anything else. But having little positive things like that before you go and do the doom scrolling on social media or political research or whatever it is that's going to be a terrible bit of news in the day, because let's be honest, the world is full of news, and news sites and social media like to highlight all the terrible news. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to kind of get that tiny little change that can really balance you out and counteract that negativity. I think that's a really interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, there is a number of like little actions that sometimes we take for granted because we're like, oh, it's not going to make a difference, is it? But it's modifying languages, modifying the language, for example, from being, negative towards more positive. Even when we think about our own failures, one of the things that I really like to think about whenever I get rejection or failure or something that's perceived to me as negative is reframing it as, rejection is redirection. So sort of start making these tiny modifiers in your language to, um, to change from a place where you perceive these things that happen to you as unchangeable to something that's more transitory and something that you can actually change. Because that's something that I talk about with Tasmin as well. And we touched on it briefly. It's neuroplasticity. So the ability to challenge and to change some of our mental schemes. And this has got to do with the way that we experience things, the way that we perceive things, and also the way that we have an outlook on the future. We talked about negative self-talk and how it's, even when you have a yay folder, for example, or like a lot of feedback from other people, it might still be difficult to overcome that negative feeling towards yourself because, you're the authority in a matter of like, how do I think about myself? But we can challenge that. We can, whenever there is something that you perceive as a failure and that you tend, and this is a generalization, but I think a lot of people will resonate with that. Whenever you have something that doesn't go right, you tend to, to think that this is something that's ingrained in your life, in your personality traits, or something that has to do with your skills, and that's not transitory. So, for example, a meeting doesn't go well, you think that you're bad at your job, or you think that you're bad at meetings in general. And I think it's really important to challenge those associations by saying, okay, this meeting didn't go well. What did not go well in that meeting? Is it something that was under my control? Was it something that was outside my control? Maybe the other person didn't show up on time. Maybe the other person was distracted and I got distracted in return, or like I was trying to second guess what they were thinking about. So collect evidence to detach, what the event is from your belief, because they don't equal each other. And I think that's something that by nature we tend to do. Something that affects us is, perceived as the truth, but it's not. An event can have different variables. So you need to take everything in your power to, collect evidence and see, okay, this is what didn't go well. What's in my power to change for next time? This is an entire episode I did with Tasmin about the ABCD model, which is cognitive a CBT model by Martin Seligman and Albert Ellis to sort of change these negative feelings.
I'll put a link for that in the show notes. I love the SEO Mindset, guys. I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes as well. So if you go and listen to the SEO Mindset, if you're not already for some reason, go and listen to that. I think it's a really interesting kind of way to wrap everything up. Is that weight of the negativity, right? Like you said, you can have 100 little snapshots and snippets in your yay folder, and then you have one negative thing, and it's like, well, they don't know about me, they don't understand me, they're just saying that to be nice, which is again a typical British thing, as we were saying earlier, just like, I'm just going to be polite for the sake of being polite or whatever. When actually giving positive feedback can be a real kind of effort and a conscious decision for a lot of people. When it comes to the negative side of things, a lot of it, like we said, comes a lot more naturally when it comes to those reviews, when it comes to that feedback. That kind of snapshot reaction often veers toward the negative side of things. So I guess listeners and viewers, take it easy on yourselves. Don't take everything so negatively. I think that's a big part of the sign of things where hopefully, like we said, the industry is moving in the right direction. The way the news is reported, hopefully moving in the right direction. The way search engines are handling and serving content is hopefully moving in a more positive and again, more neutral in many ways direction as well. Like I said, talking about authenticity and genuine actual content rather than clickbaity, outrageous stuff that we see so often these days. I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about the future of search, where we've been already and how our brains have shaped marketing and how marketing has shaped our brains, and where we're going to be 5-10 years from now when it comes to digital marketing and SEO and the way we search.
Yeah. That's then we'll do another episode and we'll reflect on this one and we'll see how things have changed. So this is our date in 10 years time. We're going to have a search with Candour. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think you summarized it perfectly. And I think, we talked about the search engine serving the content that's currently performing. And I think we have a responsibility as users. Search engines have a responsibility as providers. So yeah, hopefully we're moving towards a better landscape.
Fingers crossed. Let's lead with that hopeful message. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Well, if the listeners and viewers do want to follow you, Giulia, if they want to follow what you're doing at Neuroscience and all the cool stuff you're doing with neuromarketing, where is the best place to find you?
So the best place, probably LinkedIn. So my name is Giulia Panozzo, and I'm on Twitter. It's Sequins and Search, because I wear a lot of sequins because of skating. Also, I've got a website called neuroscience.com, where I collect all of the articles that I write about neuroscience and marketing. So I got a series up already. I've got a number of other publications that I'm working on, and a ton of stuff in drafts. So hopefully by the time this is released, there's going to be more stuff to read on.
And you've started doing community events as well, right? I saw a couple of posts on LinkedIn. That's hugely exciting and very, very cool as well.
Yeah, because it was so hard for me to find my space, in the industry. Not as in like not in the industry that we're in now, but it's more like reconciling my background with my current expertise. And it's a journey that it was hugely rewarding, but also quite difficult because I didn't have anyone to guide me through it. I just had somebody at my previous job being like, well, you're good at neuroscience, you're good at SEO. Why don't you talk about it? And I was like, yeah, actually, that could be good. Having somebody that empowered me was usually, it was a career change for me, incredibly important. So I want to foster that connection for somebody else. And I want to provide a space for students or people who are interested in neuroscience to have these discussions and figure out what the avenues that are available after a degree in neuroscience are. Because sometimes we're only exposed to, you only have a career if you go into academia. If you go into academia, so if you continue research, if you go into a lecture, a lecturing role, but there's also a space for neuroscience outside of academia in the industry. And I think now it's becoming more and more, we're more and more exposed to it, but there's not much information out there. So I want to foster that place for connection and information.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that is a brilliant kind of incentive for a lot of people to think outside the box. Like I said, my astrophysics degree doesn't really apply to marketing. And we had a very similar conversation with you can go and do research, you can work in academia, you can do all this stuff, and then not much else, I guess. Those are your options: be a teacher or don't be a teacher. There you go. Mm-hmm. And like you said, introducing people who are studying neuroscience and giving the opportunity of that is hugely relevant for marketing. Exactly as we said an hour ago when we started this podcast of that's understanding how our brains work is also understanding audience and personas and marketing and how this all affects each other. And like I said, I think a lot of people don't necessarily make that connection. So huge credit to you for giving people the opportunity to then understand there are more opportunities out there. There is more to neuroscience and the options that are available for careers rather than just you're stuck in academia. If you don't want to be a teacher, tough luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you can go and try all these different things and do different elements of marketing. I think it's really, really cool. And I love seeing the growth of neuromarketing and how that's going to shift, hopefully, again, grow and be a positive thing over the next few years. We'll have a catch up about that in 10 years as well.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really, really fun conversation.
Yeah. See you next time in 10 years then.
Yes. See you in 10 years. Exactly. And that's another episode of Search with Candour in the books. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Wherever you're watching or listening, please do subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Please rate us 5 stars if you're watching or listening on Spotify. or give us a review on Apple Podcasts. I would hugely appreciate any way you interact with the show. I think you can even leave comments on Spotify now. So you can do comments on YouTube and Spotify. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Let me know how you feel about all the stuff that's been going on in Search With Candour recently. Like I said, I'm planning to do some more solo shows. I mentioned those and did one a few months ago where I kind of did a little quick news recap. Of course, I'll still be talking with some amazing guests about incredible, interesting topics in and around digital marketing and SEO. I've got a discussion all about critical thinking skills and how important they are for marketing and SEO with the amazing Noah Lerner. I'll be talking all about local search strategies, probably ones you've never heard of, and the important new update to the local search ranking factors with one of my favorite people to follow in SEO, Darren Shaw. I will even be back with, that's right, the Halloween special at the end of October. I think it's the 28th of October is when that episode goes live. So stay tuned for Miriam, Jessie A, and Stephanie Walter returning to the show. The Scream Queens will be back on this show. We might even dress up. We might have some silly effects. Who knows? And we're going to be talking all about Halloween tips for SEO, for UX, for trend and data analysis, how to get digital PR ideas around Halloween time, and even some e-commerce tips to handle seasonal products and seasonal ranges and all that kind of good stuff. If you did see me in Brighton SEO over the last week or so, thank you so much for joining the live podcast. If you did come and see me, Sarah and Tasman do our live podcast thing on Wednesday. If you saw me on Thursday or Friday, came and said hello. Hello, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for watching, listening, whatever all you do to come and say hello and spread the good word of Candour. I always enjoy hanging out and chatting with fellow podcasters, fellow SEOs, and just having a good time and networking and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling on as I often do in these outros. So have a lovely week and I will see you next week.